The Alaskan wind was a shriek in the dark, a storm so savage it buried the world in white. Within a solitary cabin, a former Navy SEAL stared into a fire that offered no warmth, his silence profound. And then a noise, a gentle knock on the pane, then a fragile whimper from the storm. Through the ice-kissed glass, he saw her, a mother German shepherd. Her paws were flush against the window. 2 small pups trembled below her. This wasn't a plea for shelter. It was a prayer for hope itself. His next move would forever alter their fates, a testament that the strongest souls also need rescue. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you all tuning in from? Share your country down in the comments. That night in Fairbanks, Alaska was unforgiving. A gale screamed through the great pines, whipping snow into spectral ribbons that coiled around the little cabin perched on the brink of the frosted woods. The heavens were an endless slab of cold gray steel bearing down on the earth, as if to smother it completely. Inside that only cabin, a single flame wavered against the howling of the storm. And next to the old iron stove sat a man whose stillness felt more ancient than the storm raging outside. Logan Hayes had the kind of face that still held the echo of command. Angular, handsome, in a way that was sculpted by hardship, not by vanity. His short, dark hair was faintly touched with gray along his temples, and a neat, thin beard maintained by sheer discipline outlined his strong jawline. His shoulders were broad, his bearing still upright, though the world no longer required it of him. He was once a Navy SEAL, forged to withstand the unbearable, to stare down death and return unshaken. But now, 3 years removed from the service, the quiet of civilian life had proven a more formidable foe than any he had ever known. The cabin walls held the quiet relics of a life in retreat maps, tacked next to photos of uniformed brothers-in-arms, medals hidden away in a wooden box, a coffee pot perpetually brewing for a guest who would never arrive. A faint scent of pine and over-roasted coffee hung in the air. Logan was settled into the cadence of solitude. Chop wood, light fire, boil water, think less. The constant repetition occupied his hands, preventing his thoughts from wandering to the faces he couldn't save. Yet on nights like this, when the gale struck the cabin just so, it echoed the distant thrum of a helicopter's rotors, and that dormant instinct inside him awakened. He stood pouring another mug of coffee. His motions were slow, measured. Each one bearing the silent control of a man governed his whole life by discipline. As steam billowed up, he pinched the bridge of his nose, his eyes weary from countless sleepless nights. Outside, the snow hammered down. Somewhere out beyond the pines, a branch cracked loud as a gunshot. Logan froze for a moment, then forced the air from his lungs. Just the wind, he murmured. Then came the sound that broke the rhythm. A soft, unsteady tap against the glass. He turned, his brow-creased muscles tensing by instinct. The pane next to the door was opaque with rime, the stove's light reflecting on its hazy surface. He held his breath, waiting. Then another tap, softer, now almost a question. He placed his mug down and moved toward it, his heavy boots groaning on the old wood planks. Rubbing a circle in the frost with his knuckles, his breath caught at the sight. Pressed against the frozen glass on the other side was a single paw, its fur matted with ice claws, blunted and tired. And just past it, through the storm's white veil, a mother German shepherd stood, her frame gaunt and shivering. Her black and tan coat, buried deep beneath the frost, was coated in ice crystals that caught the faint lantern glow. She carried the proud, sharp features of her kind, but it was her eyes, deep, amber smart, and full of a silent plea that froze him in place. Tucked beneath her, 2 small pups pressed together, their thin coats no match for the biting wind. One attempted to raise its head only to fall back against its sibling. A knot formed in Logan's throat. Clear's throat. He recognized that desperation from villages shattered by war, in mothers willing to sacrifice everything for their young. The image shattered the icy armor he had built around his heart. His hand went to the door, but his arm stopped. The cold logic of survival echoed in his mind. Never open your door in a blizzard. Wild things find their own way. Stay out of it. But the soldier in him, the protector, screamed louder. It rose above the rest. He knelt at the window, his breath clouding the pain. "Hey," he murmured, the sound nearly stolen by the gale. The mother's ears twitched forward, her body rigid but resolved. She made no sound. She just held his gaze, her gaze unwavering as if taking the measure of the man. The pups whimpered softly. Within the cabin, the stove's heat battled the encroaching cold that seeped through the walls. Clear's throat. And Logan was caught between two worlds, one of safety, one desperate for salvation. His hand trembled over the bolt. The storm raged on the roof, echoing the old ache of choices he could never take back. And then the pups cried, and it was decided. He pulled the door open a crack, and the wind punched a blast of snow inside. The chill bit at him, Clear's throat, as sharp and deep as regret. The mother flinched but held her ground. "Come on." He coaxed his tone steady and sure, the same one he once used on scared young soldiers. "It's all right. You're safe now." Still, she paused, her body a shield against the gale. So Logan knelt down, offering his open palm. The gesture was slow, deliberate, a familiar sign he'd offered to wounded men on the field. A signal of peace, not a threat. Then, after a heart-stopping pause, the mother shepherd took one cautious step. Her pups stumbled after her on weak legs. The moment they were inside, the door swung shut with a solid thud, locking the raging storm outside. The cabin was now filled with the gentle click of their paws on the floorboards and the delicate sound of tiny lungs breathing in the warmth. He guided the small family to the stove, laying out an old wool blanket. The mother circled her pups, her tongue working quickly to warm their frozen bodies. Steam lifted from the melting ice on her coat. He knelt down beside her, feeling the painful prickle of heat in his hands. "You're lucky I was awake," he whispered softly, though a deeper part of him felt it wasn't luck at all. She met his gaze again, her amber eyes reflecting the fire's glow, and for one fleeting instant he felt as though she understood every single word left unsaid. Outside, the blizzard howled relentlessly, but the cabin was filled with the quiet, rhythmic sounds of life, his own, hers, and the two tiny lives between them. He carefully poured some warm water, watching as she drank cautiously, her tongue quaking from exhaustion. He slid a small piece of jerky her way. She sniffed, and then accepted it as the faintest trust started to grow between them. For a long while he remained silent, watching the firelight flicker across her fur. The storm outside faded to a distant hum, and with it so did the ceaseless echo of his own solitude. Seeing the puppy nestle closer to its mother awakened something deep inside, a memory of his own long-lost family. Gone too soon, and a home that once smelled of cinnamon and coffee instead of this cold smoke and silence. He leaned back against his chair, his gaze drifting towards the window where she first appeared. The ice on the glass had started to thaw, leaving streaks where her paw had been. Beyond that one fragile barrier, the storm remained endless, but here inside these four walls, warmth had returned, miles away. In another small cabin, swallowed by darkness, Martha Quinn stared out her own window. She was a woman in her early 60s, tall and slender, with hair streaked with silver, always fastened neatly in a bun. Her face held the quiet strength of one who had known great loss, but refused to yield to bitterness. Her late husband, a Navy sailor, had passed 15 years ago, leaving her with a small ranch and a heart that found its peace in prayer and simple kindnesses. Each Christmas, she baked bread for her few neighbors scattered widely across the valley. Logan included, though he hardly ever answered the door. That night, as she stirred her simmering soup, the storm battered her small house, rattling the windows, and she clasped her hands, whispering, "Lord, watch over him tonight." That young man holds too much silence inside. Her gaze lingered on the distant glow across the snow, the tiny light of Logan's cabin struggling against the storm. Back in the cabin, Logan reached his hand out again. The German shepherd raised her head, wary but unafraid. He pressed his palm flat against the frosted glass, and she mirrored him, resting her paw on the other side. Though the thin pane of glass separated them in that moment, it no longer felt like a barrier. Something inside him broke free. The loneliness like ice in his chest began to melt. He breathed out softly and whispered, "You're safe now, all of you." Outside, the wind raged on, indifferent. But inside, 3 new lives slept by the fire, and a man who had forgotten hope was watching over them. His hands held a warmth where hers had met the glass. And for the first time in years, a profound loneliness began to lift from Logan Hayes. The blizzard grew fiercer through the night, a roar like a furious ocean against the cabin walls. Snow drifted high on the windows, erasing the world outside in a wall of white, leaving just the fire's soft orange glow dancing on the old wooden floor. Inside, Logan Hayes sat by the stove, his gaze fixed on the mother dog, her body a protective shield wrapped around her young pups. Her frame shook with exhaustion, but instinct held her awake, her eyes never fully closing. Her ears twitched at every gust that battered the walls. Her tiny pups, so fragile, burrowed their noses deep into their mother's chest, seeking the last of her warmth. A soft whimper rose from one, a sound that cut through the silence with the sharp edge of a desperate plea. Logan leaned in elbows on his knees. He'd seen men tremble like that before soldiers in the field, but in a desert, not a blizzard. He recalled the shaking hand of a dying man grasping for water, the crushing weight of knowing it was too late. Now watching the smallest pup fight for breath, that same feeling returned. A familiar knot tightened in his gut. The ghost from that battlefield merged with the shivering creature in front of him. He whispered under his breath, "Not this time." He moved closer, setting the poker aside to feed another log into the fire. The flames leaped in response, casting his face in dancing light and shadow. His hand reached out for a folded wool blanket on the armchair, the very one his mother had knitted so long ago. It still held the faint, warm scent of cinnamon, as if her memory was woven into the very threads. He carefully lifted the weakest puppy from its mother's embrace. The tiny body was nearly still, its fur stiff with ice, its breath a fragile thread. Logan tucked it against his own chest under the blanket, rubbing its small body with firm, steady hands. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice a mix of command and prayer. The minutes stretched on as the merciless storm raged outside. Then, beneath the heavy wool, he felt it a faint twitch, a tiny heartbeat fighting its way back from the brink. A ragged breath escaped his lips, one he hadn't known he was holding. "Good," he whispered. "You're a fighter." The mother dog raised her head, her gaze fixed on him. Her amber eyes softened, a silent understanding passing between them as she shifted closer. She rested her muzzle gently on his knee. It was the very first sign of trust she had offered him. When the dawn finally arrived, there was no sunlight, just a gray haze where the sky and snow bled into one another. Logan was dozing in his chair, the puppy still cradled in the blanket. A steady warmth had returned to its tiny body, and faint soft squeaks now echoed from its folds. For the first time in so long, he felt the weight of a fragile life depending on him, and the feeling wasn't terrifying. A sharp knock jolted him awake. 3 solid taps on the door. Logan's body went rigid. His hand reflexively shot toward the knife on the table just before he realized who it had to be. He opened the door to find Martha Quinn bundled in a thick fur-lined coat, the biting snow still clinging fiercely to her boots. Her cheeks glowed pink from the frigid air as her gloved hands cradled a covered basket. "Morning, Logan," she greeted him, her voice a soft drawl, unique to an old Alaskan native, saying, "Figured you might need something warm. That storm hit hard last night." Logan stepped aside, ushering her in. "You shouldn't have walked through all that." She gave a faint smile. "If I stayed home every time the wind blew, I'd have perished 20 winters ago." Her gaze drifted to the corner, settling on the German shepherd coiled around her pups. Her eyebrows lifted in quiet surprise. "Well, I'll be. You've got company." "Showed up last night," Logan replied quietly. "She brought her little ones. One of them barely made it." Martha placed the basket on the table, and the scent of honey and fresh bread filled the room. "They find their way to good souls, you know," she said, "even when those souls try hard to stay hidden." He let out a hollow laugh. "Not sure you're talking about me." She approached the dogs, moving with a careful, gentle slowness. Martha carried a rare gentleness born from years of tending to stray animals and broken-winged birds on her land. Her face, etched with lines but deeply kind, glowed in the firelight. She knelt down, extending a gloved hand toward the mother dog. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice full of pity. "How long were you out there?" The shepherd sniffed her fingers, then leaned into the touch. Martha smiled. "See, Logan? She knows kindness when she feels it." He looked away, his thumb tracing a jagged scar on his left wrist, a souvenir from shrapnel back in Afghanistan. "Kindness doesn't keep a man alive," he muttered. "No," Martha answered gently, "but it reminds you why you should bother to stay that way." The morning passed as they cared for the animals. Logan boiled water to warm some milk, breaking old biscuits into a soft mash. The exhausted mother dog was the first to eat, cautious but famished before nudging the bowl toward her waiting pups. Martha sat by the window watching the snow drift down. "My husband once brought home a dog like her," she reminisced quietly. "He said it was a sailor's instinct. He couldn't leave anything lost at sea. He'd say animals understand things people forget. Loyalty costs, but it's always worth it." Logan paused, his eyes fixed on the fire. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Martha confirmed with a simple finality, "and he believed that no storm, no matter how fierce, could last forever." She looked at Logan, her gaze kind but firm. "You aren't the only one God left out here. Son, maybe they were sent so you would open a door again." Her words settled in the quiet space between them. Logan didn't respond. He just watched the pups crawl toward the growing warmth. The smallest one yawned a flash of pink tongue. Something inside his chest began to uncoil. It was a feeling he had no name for. When Martha finally stood to go, she brushed snow from her coat and held out a small jar. "Honey?" she said. "Good for the pups and good for the soul." He took it, his nod a bit awkward. "Thanks for the bread, too." She smiled warmly. "Just pay me back by taking good care of those little ones." Then, with a playful glint, "and by not freezing to death out here again." After she had left, Logan watched her figure slowly dissolve into the white haze until it disappeared. He shut the door and leaned his forehead against the solid wood. The quiet pressed in once more, but it was a different kind of silence. The air inside was warmer, somehow fuller. He turned back towards the hearth. The mother dog gently lifted her head, her eyes reflecting the fire's golden light. Her pups slept, their tiny bodies huddled together in the safety of her belly. Logan crouched down beside them. His hand reached out, hesitating before his fingers lightly brushed against her fur. She didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed softly, her paw sliding forward to rest near his hand. Something inside him finally gave way. Not with pain or sorrow, but with release, he whispered, "You're safe here." The words felt raw yet honest. The flames crackled on. Outside, the storm still raged on, beating against the roof and the windows. But within that small cabin, a quiet miracle had begun. The woman's honey sat on the table, the scent of bread still lingering in the air. And the man who had once forsaken any belief in mercy was now whispering a solemn promise to a family of strangers. He offered a faint smile, the kind that trembled at the edges but refused to disappear. "You're home now," he said once more. In reply, the German shepherd's tail thumped once against the wooden floor. And for the first time in years, the raging storm outside could not touch him. The snow had ceased its fall some time before dawn, but the stillness it left behind was somehow heavier than the storm had been. The forest surrounding Logan's cabin looked as if it were carved from ice. Each pine branch was sheathed in frost, every shadow stark and blue. Logan Hayes stood on the porch, his breath ghosting into the frigid air as he scanned the distant tree line. His eyes, still sharp from years of hard training, followed a faint trail cutting across the fresh snow. Not animal prints. They were human. The stride was long, uneven maybe from a heavy pack. He crouched down, his fingertips brushing the imprint. It was fresh. The edges remained crisp, not yet blurred by the wind. He straightened, feeling the old instincts awaken those that whispered of danger long before his mind agreed. Behind him, the mother German shepherd let out a low rumble that vibrated from her chest. Her fur began to bristle, her amber eyes fixed on the same direction as his. "Easy," Logan murmured softly. "You see it too, huh?" The dog did not blink. Her pups, growing stronger, peeked out with curiosity from behind the doorway. The air carried a peculiar scent, a mix of iron, old smoke, and a metallic tang he couldn't quite place. He followed the prints a short way down the slope, rifle slung across his shoulder. The trees grew close and tight around him, their limbs creaking softly in the wind. 20 paces out, the trail cut sharply toward the stream, and then doubled back. Whoever was here had lingered, circling around, watching. Then something by a fallen log caught his attention. A twisted piece of steel wire was half buried in the snow. He picked it up, running his thumb over the frayed, sharp edge. This wasn't random. Someone had been setting traps. He exhaled, let the wire fall, and turned back toward the cabin. The German shepherd remained at the door, her ears erect, her tail low and taut. "Nothing good out here," Logan said quietly to her. He reached down to stroke her head before stepping back inside. By noon, the sky had brightened considerably, casting a harsh white glare across the valley. Logan was chopping wood behind the cabin, each swing echoing through the biting air. The work was a mindless refuge, a physical wall against the ghosts of his past. He was lost in it until the sharp crunch of boots on snow shattered the hypnotic rhythm. "Hell of a morning to be swinging an axe out here," a voice cut in. Logan spun around, his body instantly on alert. A few yards off stood an imposing figure, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a patched brown jacket, a fur hat pulled down low. His beard was a coarse, untamed thicket dusted with frost. A hunting rifle dangled from one hand with a disquieting ease. A smile cracked his weathered face, revealing teeth yellowed by years of tobacco. "Didn't mean to startle you," the man offered. "Name's Rick Coleman. Got turned around tracking a buck before the storm." Logan didn't smile back. Logan rested his axe against the woodpile, his gaze fixed on the rifle. "You're a long way from any trail." Rick just shrugged. "Deer don't pay much mind to boundaries." His tone was easy, but his restless, pale gray eyes were taking everything in a hungry inventory of the cabin. The stack of supplies, the faint movement of the dog in the window. "You out here alone?" "Yeah," Logan said flatly. "Not many neighbors." Rick nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Mind if I warm up? I won't be any trouble. Just frozen solid out here." Logan hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, but the human part, the part still clinging to decency, overrode the soldier's caution. "Come on in," he finally said. Inside, the cabin's warmth hit them both like a wall. Rick immediately crouched by the stove, holding his hands toward the flames. Steam hissed off his damp gloves. "Man, you got it made in here," he muttered, his eyes darting around the small space. "Clean. Quiet. Sure beats freezing your hide off out there." The shepherd was a silent statue near her pups, her gaze locked on the stranger. A low growl rumbled up from her chest. A vibration felt through the floorboards. "Friendly one, huh?" Rick offered a weak smile. "She's not mine," Logan stated simply. "She just showed up after the storm." Rick let out a soft, dry chuckle. "Guess she knew the right door to knock on." For a time, their conversation was a careful dance of half-truths. Rick claimed he worked odd jobs trapping small game through the winter and selling the pelts when he was able. Clear's throat. But his story shifted with every breath. One minute he claimed to be from down around Anchorage. The next, he spoke of a camp up near Denali. Logan noted every contradiction, but held his tongue, letting the man talk. Years in combat taught him silence often revealed more than questions. As evening fell, the temperature plummeted again. A fierce wind began to rattle the shutters, while the firelight cast long, dancing shadows that twisted across the walls. Logan offered what he'd had: a simple meal of beans, bread, and coffee. Rick devoured it, mumbling his thanks between ravenous bites. When he leaned back from the table, a glint of metal on his belt caught the light. It was a trap chain, old but polished from use. Logan's eyes darted to it for a fraction of a second, then looked away. He said nothing. "You been up here alone long?" Rick asked, a smirk playing on his face. "Long enough to get used to it, long enough to forget what it's like any other way." The words hung in the air, a veiled challenge. Logan offered no reply. The fire crackled, sending a lone spark arcing against the iron kettle. From the shadows, the mother dog's growl returned deeper this time. Rick shot her a look of pure irritation. "You ought to tie that thing up before she takes a piece out of someone." Logan's voice was dangerously calm. "She won't bite unless she has a reason." The words dropped like a stone, ending the conversation. Later, as Rick lay wrapped in a blanket by the fire, feigning sleep, Logan kept vigil in the chair by the window as the snow outside glowed faintly under the moonlight. It was silver and endless. His mind turned to the wire he'd found that morning, and the trap chain on the man's belt. A memory surfaced. An explosion shattering a desert village, the click of a trigger underfoot, the scream of instinct that came a moment too late. He forced his breath to be even. "That isn't here," he silently affirmed. "This is Alaska. This is now." But across the room, the dog wasn't resting either. She lay by her pups, head held, high eyes riveted on the stranger by the fire. Every few minutes, her ears would twitch, picking up on sounds Logan couldn't perceive. "You're not wrong to be wary," he whispered. The long night wore on. When his eyes at last closed, exhaustion pulled him under like a powerful tide. He awoke at dawn to the wind seeping through a gap in the cabin door. The fire was gone. Rick's blanket lay empty on the floorboards. Logan jolted upright, scanning the room. The shelf knife was gone. The tin of jerky was gone too. He stepped outside into the snow barefoot. The cold pierced his feet like needles. Fresh prints were there leading away from the porch, straight into the woods. He followed them a short way, stopping just at the edge of the pines. And there, half buried right beneath the snow, a steel trap gleamed, its teeth bared wide, its chain glittering with frost. The snow all around it had been freshly disturbed, as if someone had set it just moments before. The trail of footprints continued on deeper into the woods, disappearing into the endless white. Logan crouched, his breath pluming in the biting cold. He brushed away the snow from the trap's teeth, the biting cold searing his palm. He knew exactly whose trap this was. Behind him, the German shepherd let out one sharp bark, a clear warning. He rose slowly, his gaze fixed on the disappearing tracks. The forest was quiet once more, but the sense of danger lingered in the trees like a breath held in waiting. As he turned back to the cabin, the faint morning light was already starting to die behind a wall of clouds, and snowflakes drifted lazily through the still air. By the time he reached the porch, the footprints heading into the forest were already beginning to soften, disappearing beneath a fresh blanket of white. Rick Coleman was gone. All that was left was the open trap gleaming under the snow, patiently waiting for something or someone to wander too close. The dawn arrived, pale and frigid, a thin mist rising off the snow, as if the earth itself were breathing. The forest appeared still, and yet something about that quiet felt deeply wrong. Logan Hayes stepped out from the cabin. A mug of coffee steamed in his hand as his eyes swept across the open field where the snow drifted up to the porch. The German shepherd mother stood by the doorway, her thick coat tipped with silver in the pale morning light. Her two pups usually shadowed her every step, clumsy and joyful, their tails beating a happy rhythm against the air. But today, just one sat by her leg. The second one was gone. Logan frowned, asking softly, "Where's your baby?" The mother answered with a low whine, her eyes fixed on the tree line to the north. Her body grew tense, one paw already held aloft. She took a few slow steps forward, nose to the ground, sniffing the air. The remaining pup whimpered, confused. Logan's mug hit the table, his pulse suddenly racing. "Easy," he breathed, grabbing his coat and gloves. "We're going to find them." The tracks were faint, just shallow marks in the powder weaving toward the dark edge of the forest. The mother dog pushed forward, her tail held rigid, her paws surprisingly swift in the deep snow. Logan followed her lead. The crunch of his boots echoed in the bitter cold. Every few yards she'd stop, scent the air, then surge ahead. He could see it now where the pup had fought. Small, uneven prints and a deep drag in the snow where something had pulled it back. The wind sliced through the trees like shattered glass. The branches groaned above them, and a muffled stream murmured somewhere beneath the thick mantle of frost and ice. Then he saw it. A splash of color completely out of place, red against the white. His stomach dropped. The pup was half buried in a drift at the base of a pine, its tiny leg caught fast in a cruel steel snare. A halo of blood stained the snow around it. The small body shivered, a pained whimper caught in its throat. The mother lunged. She let out a frantic, guttural bark. Logan caught her collar, stopping her from rushing into the trap. "Easy now," he rasped, his own voice tight. "I've got him." He fell to his knees beside the pup. It was an old trap, the brutal kind meant for a wolf or a fox, never meant for something so small. Its steel jaws hadn't pierced the leg, they had crushed it. Logan ripped off his gloves, the bitter cold biting his fingers as he strained to pry the steel jaws apart. His breath came in ragged white clouds. "Come on," he grunted through a clenched jaw. "Come on!" But the frozen metal wouldn't yield. He fought harder. His hands were slick with the pup's blood and freezing slush. Then a sudden sharp crack of metal and the jaws sprang open. The pup whimpered just once, then fell limp in his hands. For a terrifying second he believed he was too late. But then he felt it. A fragile pulse beneath the fur, faint and shallow. But it was there. He quickly wrapped the tiny body in his scarf, tucking it inside his coat, sharing his own body heat. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're going to be okay." The mother gently pressed her nose against the scarf-wrapped bundle, desperate for a sign. Licking its face, her soft whines filled with anguish. Logan met her gaze, seeing the raw worry there. It was the same look of fear he saw in soldiers' eyes when a brother went down. "Let's get him home," he said. They pushed back through the deepening snow as the wind rose to a howl. Logan could feel the searing pain in his numb fingers and the dull ache in his chest. By the time they finally reached the cabin, the fire was nearly out. He stumbled inside, collapsing to his knees before the hearth. The mother dog stayed right beside him, a nervous shadow. Her breath came in quick pants, her frantic eyes shifting between him and the still small bundle in his arms. "Don't you give up on me now," he murmured, rubbing the tiny chest with his bare hands, the blood smearing onto his skin. "You fought so hard to stay alive." The cabin door creaked open behind him. It was Martha Quinn. She was bundled in a heavy wool coat, her face starkly pale from the cold. Her gray eyes went wide at the sight before her. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, hurrying to his side. "What happened?" "Trap." Logan answered, his voice flat. He never looked up. "Out on the northern ridge." Martha knelt down beside him. Her hands trembled as she reached for a towel. "Rick," she breathed out. Logan didn't answer. The silence said everything. The name hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Together they simply worked in silence. Martha brought warm water from the stove, pouring it with care over the pup's leg to wash away the blood. Logan held the small body still, his jaw clenched tight, his hands stained crimson and raw. The pup gave one shiver, then a faint whimper. That small sound was enough. Martha let out a shaky breath. "He's still here," Logan sagged back, a powerful wave of relief crashing over him. His shoulders slumped, tension finally leaving his body. The mother dog coiled around her pup, gently licking its small head with slow, deliberate, careful movements. Martha stood wiping her hands on her apron. She looked over at Logan, her expression gentle yet deeply knowing. "You did a good thing, Logan Hayes," she said. "You saved a life today." He just shook his head. "It's only a dog." A faint smile touched her lips. "There is no such thing as just a life." Her voice grew softer. "You might think you're saving them, but maybe they're the ones who are saving you." He looked into the flames, her words settling into a place deep within him. The dancing flames brought back memories of campfires from overseas, the nights when he couldn't save them all, the faces that still appeared when sleep would not come. Clear's throat. But this time the warmth from the fire wasn't hollow. As Martha left, she stopped at the doorway. The snow had started falling again, silent and soft. She turned back to him. "You keep that fire going," she said gently. "For both of them." Logan just nodded, lost for words. He remained by the fire long after she'd gone. The pup was sleeping now, its breathing more even, its small head tucked against the edge of his coat. His mother lay right there beside him, her tail curled around both of her children. The cabin smelled of smoked snow and a faint hint of iron, but for once it didn't smell of war. Logan leaned back in his chair, a profound exhaustion pulling at his bones. He reached down, letting his hand rest gently on the pup's tiny body, its chest rising and falling in a delicate rhythm. For the first time in years, he felt a feeling that was almost peace. Outside, the wind sighed softly through the pines, carrying away the final echo of pain. Inside, close to the warm glow of the fire, a soldier and 3 tiny lives slept in absolute stillness. Night fell over Fairbanks, a soft velvet shroud, heavy with silence and the low hum of wind in the pines. The deep snow had now crusted over with ice, reflecting the dim glow of a lantern hanging near Logan Hayes' window. Inside his cabin, the fire had burned down low, its orange light flickering on the wooden walls over the mother German shepherd asleep beside her pups. Logan was at the table, cleaning the rifle he hadn't held in years. His hands moved with a familiar, practiced ease, but his thoughts were far away, on the trap out in the woods, on the man who disappeared without a single word. He tried to believe Rick Coleman was gone for good, consumed by the forest, but an unease remained. The quiet that follows danger is never truly peace. It was the deep inhale just before the next shot. The clock ticked past midnight. Logan stood, stretching the deep ache from his shoulders. He walked to the window just to check on the storm, but what he saw there froze him where he stood. There, just past the light's reach, a figure stood frozen. A tall shape half veiled by the swirling snow, remained utterly still. The lantern's glare on the glass blurred the line between reality and illusion, but then it moved a subtle shift, a step closer, and his pulse thundered in his throat. It stood in the exact spot the mother German shepherd first appeared. Logan leaned in his gaze, sharpening with suspicion. The wind seized the lantern, throwing a flicker of gold on the snow. For a single heartbeat, he saw it clearly, a man's silhouette, broad-shouldered, cloaked in a heavy coat. A rifle strap faintly glinted in the fleeting light. Then it was gone, consumed by the dark. He retreated, breathing slowly, methodically, forcing his thoughts to align. "Rick," he breathed. A cold certainty settled in. The bastard was back. Beside him, the German shepherd was already awake, standing statue still by the door, her teeth bared. Her ears were pricked forward, a low growl rumbling deep within her chest. Logan knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Stay close," he whispered, then reached for his rifle and chambered around. The sound was a quiet click, yet it thundered in the stillness, moving with absolute silence. He extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness save for the fire's faint glow. Outside, the snow tapped the glass like soft fingertips. Minutes dragged on. Still nothing, just the occasional crack of frozen trees. Then another sound. A soft metallic scrape near the porch. Logan's muscles coiled tight. He edged to the window, bringing the rifle up. Through the fragile film of frost, he could barely discern a shape hunkered down by the steps. The wind shifted, causing the porch lantern to swing slowly, spilling enough light for the reveal. His blood ran cold. It was a trap, brand new, half buried, its chain lost under the snow. Someone had set it right below the porch, exactly where his dog loved to play. Anger flared like a fire in his chest. He opened the door slowly, hinges creaking. The German shepherd pressed close against him, silent but intensely alert. "Go inside," he murmured. She held her ground, unmoving. Together, they stepped onto the porch. The cold was a physical blow. The woods beyond the clearing were just shadow and frozen breath. Logan scanned the trees, rifle up, every nerve alive. "You better keep walking," he muttered into the howling wind. "Come near this cabin again and it won't end like last time." For a long moment, only silence answered him. Just the soft whisper of snow falling from branches. Then from deep within the pines, a sound returned, the crunch of one boot step. Then another, and then only silence. Logan stood frozen until the cold burned deep into his bones. Only when the forest was utterly still did he lower his rifle and kneel by the trap. It was brand new, modern stainless steel baited with a strip of meat frozen solid. He disabled it with steady hands, though the rage inside his chest was a storm. When he finally rose, his breath was a ragged white plume. Back inside, the warmth washed over him. The mother dog circled once before settling, but her gaze remained locked on the dark window. Logan leaned the rifle against the door and poured a cup of coffee, his hand still carrying a faint, lingering tremor. Sleep never came for him that night. With each pop of the fire, his head lifted, scanning the window for movement. The hours just crawled. By the time dawn began to fracture the dark, his eyes burned with exhaustion. A gentle knock startled him from his daze. It wasn't sharp, nor was it impatient. It was soft, almost rhythmic. He opened the door and found Martha Quinn there, her cheeks rosy from the biting cold, a thick wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She looked smaller somehow, lost in layers of beige and brown. Her gloved hands were clutching a small jar. "Morning," she whispered, stepping inside before the wind could snatch her words away. "You look like you never slept." Logan set his rifle aside. "Didn't," he admitted. Her gaze fell on the trap on the table, its metal teeth glinting in the firelight. Her expression hardened. "So he came back." Logan nodded grimly. "Didn't see him clear, but I know it was Rick. He's laying traps again, only this time he's closer." Martha sighed, placing the small jar of honey on the counter. "The sheriff won't make it out this far until spring. You'll have to keep watch." Her voice held both a warning and deep sympathy. "You're not alone in this, you know. God sends these storms not to break us, but to reveal who stands beside us." He met her gaze, the words striking a chord deeper than she knew. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. She offered a faint smile, her breath misting in the air. "You have more strength than you realize. Logan Hayes. And you've got so much more to lose now." Her gaze drifted over to the mother dog sitting near the hearth, protecting her pups. "Sometimes he gives us company long before he ever gives us peace." And when she finally left, the sky was already brightening. Logan watched her go, his gaze following until the trees swallowed her whole. Her footprints erased by the fresh snow. The cabin somehow felt warmer when he stepped back inside. The pups were stirring, one playfully nudging its little sibling. The mother dog stood padded over to the window and gently pressed her paw against the cold glass. Her print remained, 5 small marks upon the thin frost. Logan stepped beside her, laying his hand over the very same spot. The cold from the glass seeped into his skin, yet the gesture felt like a solemn vow. Outside, the forest stretched on silent and white, the storm just waiting somewhere beyond the hills. Inside, man and dog stood as one, guardians of a fragile peace that neither one of them was willing to lose. The morning arrived quiet and silver, a cold that made the world hold its breath. The storm had finally passed in the night, leaving behind a sky as pale as ash and snow that shimmered like glass beneath the early sun. Logan Hayes stood near the stove pouring a cup of coffee, listening to the soft crackle of the dying embers. The cabin smelled of pine wood and smoke, the scent of safety something earned. The German shepherd mother was curled up near the hearth, her 2 pups fast asleep against her belly, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect unison. For the first time in weeks, the quiet finally felt like peace. He pulled on his boots and opened the cabin door to fetch firewood, and stopped dead. Right at the top of the steps, resting neatly on the clean snow, were 2 rabbits. Their white fur was perfect and unbroken, their bodies still warm enough to steam in the impossibly cold air. No signs of a struggle, just 2 offerings laid down gently as if in tribute. Logan stared, his breath hanging in the air like a ghost. He glanced to the clearing's edge where fresh paw prints stood out against the untouched snow. The pattern was clear. They were the mother dogs. She had ventured out before dawn's first light to hunt, bringing back sustenance not for her own survival but for his. A quiet, disbelieving laugh escaped his lips. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered in disbelief. Then his voice softened. "You are the bravest one here." The German shepherd appeared in the doorway, tilting her head. Snowflakes kissed her ears, and her coat was dense, streaked with hues of black and gold that captured the light like rising smoke. Her eyes held a deep pride, something so close to human. Logan knelt, meeting her gaze directly. "I guess we're partners now," he said warmly. He then carried the rabbits into the cabin, placed them by the stove, and reached for his knife to begin. Soon the cabin filled with the rich aroma of roasting meat. The pups stirred from their slumber, blinking sleep from their curious eyes. The smaller of the 2 still favored a leg from the wound that was slow to heal, but his tail thumped as he watched his mother settle contentedly by the fire's warmth. Logan sat across from her, his own meal in hand, and lifted his coffee mug in a mock salute. "You hunt, I cook, a fair trade." Outside, the forest shimmered in the morning's first light. For a moment, the cabin felt like the only sanctuary in the world. By late morning, a soft knock came at the door. 3 light, rhythmic taps. He knew who it was. Logan smiled faintly. "Come in, Martha." The door groaned open to reveal Martha Quinn, bundled in a heavy gray coat, a hand-knitted scarf pulled snugly around her neck. Her cheeks were rosy from the sharp cold, and her silver-streaked hair peeked out from under her wool cap. She held a small basket filled with some nails rope and an old hammer. "You weren't joking about that storm," she said, knocking the snow from her boots. "That wind tore up your fence. Figured I'd help you mend it before the next one hits." Logan grinned. "You didn't have to make the trip out here." She waved his words away. "Better than sitting at home listening to my pipes whine and freeze." Then she noticed the 2 cleaned rabbit skins by the stove and raised an eyebrow slightly. "My, you've been busy." "Not I," Logan said. "Her." Martha turned to the dog, who lifted her noble head at the mention. When she saw the proud set of the dog's stance, her smile softened. "Oh my," she breathed out. "She hunted these for you." "She did," Logan confirmed. "Left them right at the door." Martha's eyes now shone with a quiet understanding. "That's a rare gift," she said gently. "Animals will always remember a true kindness. It's the Lord's way of teaching us gratitude, through creatures who cannot speak it, but only ever show it." They stepped outside together, the snow crunching under their boots. The sky above had turned a deeper, more miraculous shade of blue, the kind of blue that only appears after a storm. Logan retrieved some wooden stakes from his shed as Martha held the broken fence frame steady. She worked with a strength that was surprising for her age. Her hands were rough, capable, and very patient. As they worked, she spoke not of the perils or the risks, but of the small graces that made this wilderness a home. "You ever feel it?" she asked, driving a nail home. "How the silence out here is different. Not empty, just waiting. Like the whole world is holding its breath for something beautiful. Logan watched her, the sunlight catching in her hair. "Can't say I've ever seen it like that," he admitted. "Well," she replied with a soft smile, "that's because you've been listening for trouble for too long. Try listening for the peace in it, just for a change." He offered no reply, but her words echoed long after the work was done. When the last plank was secured and the fence stood strong again, Martha dusted the snow from her gloves, surveying their efforts with a quiet, earned pride. "There now," she said. "Good as new." The mother dog came over, nosed their handiwork, and then gave an approving wag of her tail. Martha let out a soft laugh. "See, even she agrees it'll hold." A brief shared laugh passed between them before she turned to go. "You gonna be all right out here?" she asked. "I will be," Logan confirmed. "I've got good company." Martha smiled. Then maybe the storms won't feel quite so long anymore." As she vanished between the trees, Logan stood there for a moment, watching the smoke drift from his chimney, her faint footprints already disappearing in the sunlit snow. He turned then and went back inside. The cabin was warm once more. The pups were a clumsy tumble near the hearth, rolling over one another, their small coats shining like freshly minted copper. Their mother stood guard at the window, her breath misting the cold glass. Logan followed her steady gaze. Outside, the snow was catching the light, endless and profoundly calm. He reached up about to draw the shutters when his reflection met hers in the frosted pane, the shape of a man and the silhouette of a dog standing side by side. The line between them, between the wild and the wounded, between man and beast, it simply dissolved in that single shared image. A quiet smile touched his lips. For once, the glass wasn't a barrier. It was a mirror for the warmth they shared. The sky that morning was the softest gray of ash, touched with the faintest gold, where the sun began to crest the mountains. Frost traced delicate white veins across the cabin windows, catching the dawn light like shattered crystal. Inside, the fire embers glowed, its quiet crackle a soft rhythm against the sound of steady breathing. Logan Hayes slept in his chair, and the German shepherd mother curled protectively at his feet. Her pups slept soundly against her, their fur warm embers in the firelight. He awoke the way a soldier does, his senses coming alive, a heartbeat before his eyes opened. For a fleeting second, he couldn't remember where he was. The silence was too complete, the warmth too foreign. Then Faith, though she had no name, yet lifted her head and he saw her watching him, calm and steadfast. He managed a faint smile. "You've been up before me again," he murmured, rising to stretch the deep stiffness from his back. His gaze drifted to the corner of the cabin, where a dust-laden trunk rested beneath a shelf, lined with faded photographs and tarnished medals. That trunk had been there since the day he came home from his deployment untouched, unopened, a burden of memories he hadn't yet found the strength to face. But this morning felt different. There was a gentleness in the air, a quiet command to face what he'd buried. He knelt beside it, his hand clearing away the dust. The metal latch groaned open, releasing a faint scent of leather oil and time itself. Inside lay pieces of another life, an old Navy uniform folded with absolute precision, and a black and white photo of a young man with much harder eyes, and underneath everything, a small collar worn and frayed, but its simple metal tag was still gleaming. He lifted it with a hesitant hand. The tag caught the firelight, revealing the etched words, U.S. Navy K-9 Unit Rex. For a long moment he could not move. His breath hitched and the cabin faded until all that was left was the tag in his hand and the echo of a bark deep within his memory. Rex? The K-9 partner who had saved his life in a desert ambush 5 long years ago. The one who had taken the bullet intended for him. The one he was forced to bury under foreign sand with no way to bring him home. He closed his eyes. The old grief rose up sharp and clean as splintered ice. When he opened his eyes, the German shepherd was sitting right there in front of him, her head tilted gently, her amber eyes searching his face for answers. Logan swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have to remind me of him," he whispered. "But maybe that is the point." He slowly reached out, His rough fingers gently traced the fur around her neck. Then carefully he fastened the collar. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her this whole time. "There," he said, his voice thick. "You've earned it." The dog blinked slowly. Then she nuzzled his hand. He smiled, though his eyes glistened. "Faith," he said, the name just appearing, the name slipping out before the thought was even fully formed. "That's your name, Faith." It simply felt right. It felt like healing. A gentle knock sounded at the door. He turned quickly, wiping his eyes, and opened it to see Martha Quinn standing outside, her cheeks flushed from the bitter cold. She was bundled in her dark blue coat, her knitted hat pulled low, a basket of bread and preserves clutched tightly in her arms. "Morning, Logan," she said, stepping inside with her usual calm grace. "I brought you a little something for breakfast. I thought you might be running low on groceries again." He smiled. "You've got a better sense for hunger than any supply line I ever knew." She laughed, a sound as warm and grounding as the crackle of wood in the fireplace. "I guess that's what years of being a Navy wife will do. You learn to feed the stubborn." As she set her basket down, her gaze caught the shine of metal around the dog's neck. "Well now," she said softly as she crouched. "That's new." Logan nodded. "Found it in my old trunk. It belonged to my unit's K9. Rex saved my life." Martha's hand stopped mid-air. "And now you've given it to her." "She earned it," Logan said. "She saved me in her own way." Martha glanced from the collar to Logan, then to the dog who sat with pride beside him. "Faith suits her," she said, voice quiet. "It's almost reverent." Then after a pause, she added, "And you too, Logan. You both found faith again." The words landed gently, but with a deep resonance, the kind that lingered after silence filled the room again. Logan looked towards the window where morning light was stretching across the glass. Outside, the snow near the porch had finally begun to melt, cascading in delicate streams that gleamed like silver. Faith followed his gaze, her paws silent on the floorboards. She placed her paw on the cold pane, the very spot where she once pleaded for shelter on that first desperate night. Logan moved beside her, laying his palm on the opposite side. Though separated by the cold glass, the warmth connecting his palm to her paw was real. Beyond the glass, the horizon bloomed with the first light of dawn. Pines whispered, swaying in the breeze. Inside, man and dog stood together, their reflections blending in the frosted pane to become a single soul. The familiar ache in Logan's heart, a constant echo of the war, finally felt lighter, not gone but eased. He finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting, but remembering without letting the pain consume him. Faith tilted her head gently, nudging his hand with her muzzle. A smile touched Logan's lips. "Welcome home, girl," he breathed. The sun climbed the sky, flooding the cabin with gold. Her new collar gleamed its letters, catching the light, a silent, binding promise. For the first time in an eternity, Logan felt he wasn't just waiting for the end of something. He felt a new beginning. The thaw arrived gently, like the first easy breath after a devastating sickness. The snows that had smothered the Alaskan wilderness for months started to melt, seeping back into the dark earth. Creeks once frozen silent now whispered to life, the air thick with the fragrance of pine and thawing ground. For the first time since Logan Hayes came home from the war, the quiet was broken not by memories, but by birdsong. He stood on his porch that morning, hands on the rail, weathered smooth by winter's grip. The sky was vast and blue, a hue he hadn't truly noticed in years. The sun, warm and forgiving, spilled through the trees like a benediction. At his feet, Faith rested her fur, catching the morning light in glints of gold along her back.